for the other as well, because at halftime we said it, 5 consecutive playoff games. It's a Pittsburgh team that's trailed by at least 14 points at half. Something has to be said here about getting off the bus. Who does that fall on?
I mean, collectively, everyone involved. Of course, Mike Tomlin as the head coach, his entire staff, and then the players, because the sense of urgency has to be there. And with this playoff letdown, it's a little different. Because, Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't recall any other playoff team from the Pittsburgh Steelers, right, that have went into the playoffs losing 4 straight games in the regular season. While you look at how bad they were in the regular season, one would think the sense of urgency would be put on display, especially to start the game off. But to your point, Joe, they were sleeping at the wheel. They didn't even play around with their food. They didn't even look at their food. It was just there. And in terms of playoff football, especially when you're on the road, you have to get off to fast starts to be able to snatch the momentum away from the home team. And then in terms of the execution defensively, read option left, read option right, RPOs, they just decided not to cover Lamar Jackson. Everyone was crashing in on Derrick Henry. Someone's supposed to be responsible for the quarterback, especially with an offense that has been known to do these said things. And this is an offense that you know fairly well being divisional foes. So this was a letdown, but you look at how they finished the season, Ryan, I really felt like I would see a different team in terms of energy, execution, because anytime you lose, 4 straight, and you get into the playoffs, one would think you would be a little more dialed in.
Yeah, I really don't agree with that analysis, honestly. This idea that the Steelers didn't show up. Yeah. The first half obviously was not ideal. They could not get anything offensively, but that's been the struggles of the Steelers in general because they're just so reliant on the deep shots. They didn't even get to the red zone once. They weren't even in the red zone. Like, I still am, like, curious if that box score is just messed up. I use ESPN. They weren't in the red zone once. I mean, like, everything was just, you know, these deep shots. PFF kind of will give you, you know, the big-time throws and the turnover-worthy plays and all of that, but during the game, but then it, like, randomly goes away, and then I think they have to, like, kind of, like, reevaluate and make sure that they're correct. But at one point, it was like Russ had 5 big-time throws. I mean, like, everything is just deep shot, deep shot, deep shot. And that's how they scored. That's how they moved the chains. Like, that's how they were able to get anything going. They had no run game. 11 carries for 29 yards rushing. I mean, that's insane. That's really, really insane. And honestly, the defense, like, I don't know how you stop Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson. I mean, they were just beasts. The reality is, and I know it's a tough pill to swallow, the Ravens were just better. And that's even what Mike Tomlin said. Mike Tomlin was just like, the better team won. You know, they were the better team today. And so it's not a matter of like the Steelers just needed to play hard or they weren't ready to play. That wasn't necessarily the case. The Ravens were just better. That's really what it came down to for me. And the reality is that the defense could not slow down the Baltimore Ravens. And then the offense wasn't doing anything. So if the offense was at least able to score a little bit and sustain drives, one, that keeps the Ravens off the field for a little bit, as well as obviously just keeping pace with points. But they couldn't, because in the second half, things changed. At the second half, they were finally able to slowed down the Ravens. And granted, the score could have been a little bit differently, because I think, you know, obviously at a minimum, the Ravens would have at least kicked a field goal, potentially even another touchdown, which would have then had them give up, you know, 35. And that's also what Mike Tomlin said. He goes, in the playoffs, you got to score points, and they only scored 14. But at the same time, the time of possession was crazy. The Steelers only had the ball for 20 minutes. The Ravens had the ball for 40 minutes. I mean, they ran the ball 50 times, 299 yards. If you can't stop the run, the clock is just going to go. I mean, Russ played pretty good, 20 for 29, 270 yards, 9.3 yards per attempt, a 121 rating. I mean, he was doing his job. He really was. He played really well. I guarantee you, when it's all said and done, when I look at PFF and look at all the quarterbacks who played, like, we'll be at the top. He played pretty well. But they had no run game. They gave him no easy passes. I mean, like, nearly a third of his passes would all be considered, like, big-time throws. I mean, that's just all they're relying on. And that's on the offense itself. I don't necessarily blame the players. I don't even know. I could never wrap my head around it. And it's not on Russ, because Russ can obviously do more than just throw the ball. down the field. He's more than capable of doing that. So it was just, I don't know. I mean, they had over 300 yards at half. The Ravens. They had over 300 yards at the first half. And then they ended up finishing the game with 464. So they did slow them down in that second half. And then they scored. You know, they essentially won the second half. But that first half, they just couldn't get it going, man. They couldn't get it going. And it was boom or bust with Russ. He either throws a beautiful ball down the field and they catch it, or he gets like sacked. I mean, like that's what it came down to. He had 4 sacks. I mean, it was frustrating. It was frustrating. But I don't think that this was the Steelers' lack of energy, lack of caring. I don't think that's what it was. I think I didn't love the offensive game plan. I think defensively it was always going to be hard to stop the Ravens. That's the way it goes sometimes. That's the way how the playoffs are. That's the way it is, right? You have to be able to try to overcome that. We've seen the Bills overcome. We've seen the Chiefs. We've seen the Ravens. We've seen the Steelers in the past overcome it. Sometimes you got to overcome giving up yards and points. That's what you got to do. And again, that's why Mike Tomlin was like, you got to score points in the playoffs. Very rarely are you going to have these, weird games where you're winning 18-60 in the playoffs, unless the weather is obviously really impacting it. So then again, that first half offensively, why can't you move the chains? Why can't you get any of some of these easy, quick throws? Why does everything have to be boom or bust? You got to be able to establish the run game. You got to get some easy screen passes in there to get you 5-6 yards. You got to make it easy. But again, they were 5 for 11 on third down, which isn't terrible. I mean, it's nearly 50%, which is at the top of the league. I think the highest is 55% or something. So, again, the Steelers were right there. But in a game where you clearly aren't going to be able to slow them down in the first half offensively, you needed to be able to keep some pace offensively. You needed to. And they just couldn't. And again, 29 yards rushing is indefensible. It's indefensible. And it's on 11 carries. So you can't just be like, oh, they couldn't run the ball because they were down. Even when they weren't. I mean, they just lacked the ability to. So, yeah. This team never really felt like it had an identity. And I'm not so sure I understand how you get the identity. And I think that is a problem when a couple things happen, especially offensively. Now I'm speaking on, because Mike Tomlin is the identity of this team and the culture, especially defensively. But offensively, when you bring in a quarterback like Russ, who has to kind of redeem himself, and you have a quarterback like Justin Fields, who people just fundamentally don't trust or believe in, and you have a defensive head coach, so now you're relying on your offensive coordinator, and an offensive coordinator that's not known as a super genius, right? He's not the Ben Johnson, he's not a Shanahan, he's not a scrub either, but he doesn't hold that weight. Your offense doesn't know who do they trust, who do they listen to. You don't have that big running back who okay, we're going to get behind. You don't have that star quarterback in his prime who you say, all right, we can get behind this quarterback. You don't have that genius offensive head coach who's doesn't matter. We got Russ, we got Fields. I got this. We can find a way. There's no one to kind of get behind. So you get a lot of disconnection. A lot of disconnection. And it's kind of how this game gets. I really try to look at games a lot. I don't do it on purpose. It's just how my mind works of I use a lot of words like connected, disconnected, intentional. And it was this offense, because of the lack of identity, because of the lack of who to really get behind, which is why I was always a proponent of not bringing in Justin Fields, in random plays, because it's well, who are we behind here? What are we doing here? Because every time you throw in Justin Fields, you're pretty much saying Russ isn't good enough, and it's just what do we do here? You just get stuck. And that's why they were the closest thing that they were able to get behind was Russ's ability to push the ball down the field, and he passed with flying colors. He really passed with flying colors. He showed I got it. But you got to give me something else here. You got to give me something else. You got to give me a run game. You got to give me easy, tight end targets to get me 5, 6, 7 yards. You got to do something here. And then if not, then you got to be aggressive on 3rd and 4th downs. Like, because if you're just going to do that, boom or bust, and have lots of punts and field goals, and you're not going to you're going to have 14-point games. Especially when you know the Ravens are running the ball all day and dominating the clock. So yeah, I feel for Steelers fans for this one. This was always going to be a tough game. This was always going to be a tough game on the road. The Steelers were really running out of steam. Injuries catching up to them. And you were going up against the Ravens, who were just as hot. They're arguably the hottest team in the NFL right now, honestly, especially after this playoff win. So it was always going to be a tough game. Never really made Lamar Jackson ever uncomfortable. I don't know if he was uncomfortable even once this entire game. And that's also the path to beating the Ravens, is making Lamar uncomfortable, unsure of himself. They never did that. And they never disrupted what the game plan was for the Baltimore Ravens, which, again, it's easier said than done, which is why you have to keep up offensively, and they just couldn't. But those are just my thoughts. I'd absolutely love to hear yours. What do you guys all think about the Pittsburgh Steelers loss versus the Ravens? Who do you think's to blame? Do you think it's just, hey, the Ravens are a better team? Do you think this was the game that the Steelers could have won, but just simply did not show up? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single comment, so whether you agree with me or disagree with me, either way, let's get in some discussions, let's get in some fights, but ultimately, let's just have some fun. And please do consider subscribing. We're building an amazing community here, and I absolutely love to see you part of it. I want to build something that we all genuinely feel connected to, something that we're really excited to be part of. I think we're on our way to doing it. Please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, as it really does help with the visibility and the algorithm. Thank you so much. See you next time.